A billionaire asked a black waitress for financial advice as a fun. Her first words left him frozen in silence. "How about tossing in some financial advice along with that water?" scoffed Leonard Hawthorne, not even glancing up from his glowing phone screen. He snickered at his own remark, clearly amused by himself and no one else. The Maison Verdun, one of Manhattan's most exclusive dining sanctuaries, was where old wealth whispered and new money demanded to be seen. Polished marble, imported crystal, and a guest list stacked with CEOs, senators, and heirs to empires. Leonard belonged here. He had been raised to believe rooms like this were built for men like him. In his world, he wasn't just wealthy, he was financial nobility. Power responded when he spoke. People leaned in when he moved. And waitstaff? To him, they existed only to serve, never to be heard, and certainly never to be respected. So when the young waitress stepped forward, calm, poised, and unshaken, Leonard didn't bother granting her the smallest acknowledgement. He expected a nod, a forced smile, maybe even a nervous laugh. What he never expected was a response that would pierce straight through his arrogance and dismantle his certainty in a single sentence. Amara Cole froze, the crystal water pitcher suspended midair. At 28, she had served more entitled men than she cared to remember. Power-drunk executives, inherited millionaire heirs, and hedge fund hotshots who believed humility was beneath them. But something in Leonard Hawthorne's condescending tone didn't just irritate her. It struck a nerve that ran deep. This wasn't ordinary disrespect. It was the casual, dismissive contempt that men like him had perfected for people like her. The kind they delivered without blinking, without thinking, without consequence. When she finally spoke, her voice remained polished and professional, but her eyes, sharp, unflinching, and quietly fierce, told a different story. "Actually," Amara replied, steady and composed, "I'd start by allocating 40% into emerging market ETFs in sustainable energy, 25% into undervalued medical technology equities, 20% into commercial real estate funds in secondary metro regions, 10% into agricultural commodities as an inflation hedge, and I'd keep 5% liquid for short-term arbitrage plays." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't flinch. She simply stated it, clean, precise, confident. The dining room fell still. Conversation softened. Silverware paused. For a moment, even the chandelier lights seemed to hold their breath. The silence that followed hit harder than any insult ever could. Leonard Hawthorne finally lifted his head. The lazy grin he had worn so confidently a moment earlier stiffened, then collapsed altogether as her words sank in. That wasn't a guess. That wasn't a lucky string of jargon. What he had just heard was institution-grade financial strategy, the kind delivered in boardrooms, not whispered at a dinner table by someone refilling glasses. "I'm sorry." "What did you just say?" Leonard muttered, this time without arrogance, without humor, only disbelief. For the first time that evening, he was actually looking at her, not through her. Amara finished pouring the water with calm, practiced grace, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. To her, the moment seemed almost ordinary. "You asked for investment advice," she replied. "I simply answered your question." The polished men in tailored suits around the table, executives who had been bragging moments earlier about quarterly returns and overseas acquisitions, fell silent. Their conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Every eye in that private dining room now locked onto Amara Cole, the waitress who had spoken like a market strategist. The balance in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. Marcus Ellington, senior partner at Hawthorne Capital, cleared his throat, a soft, nervous sound that betrayed the tension at the table. Leonard Hawthorne was never questioned, never corrected, and certainly never intellectually outmatched. And yet here they were. "Where did you learn about emerging markets?" Leonard asked. This time there was no condescension in his voice, only genuine curiosity laced with disbelief. Amara offered a small, composed smile, but behind it was something sharp, something unreadable, something that made Leonard's chest tighten for reasons he couldn't name. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of learning," she replied, "when others don't assume they're incapable." The words landed with surgical precision. Around them, the grand dining room of Maison Verdun seemed to freeze. Waiters paused mid-step. Conversations thinned into hushed whispers. Even the maître d', watching from near the entrance, looked uneasy. No one in this establishment, this sanctuary of wealth and ego, had ever witnessed Leonard Hawthorne being disarmed, especially not by someone he had tried to belittle. Amara turned and walked toward another table, completely unbothered, as though she had merely recited a menu special. Leonard watched her go, his expression conflicted. Confusion, reluctant respect, and beneath it all something else, an intrigue that bordered on fascination. For the first time in a long time, Leonard Hawthorne wasn't the most compelling mind in the room. There was something about this woman that simply did not align with the uniform she wore. Amara Cole carried herself with the composure of someone who had stood in far larger arenas than a Manhattan dining room. She moved with purpose, spoke with precision, and possessed the quiet confidence of a mind sharpened by storms no one here could guess. While the rest of the restaurant remained frozen in the aftershock of her words, Amara continued her work as if nothing unusual had occurred. But her eyes, calm, steady, unshaken, betrayed a depth that could only belong to someone who had survived battles no resume could capture. Across the table, Leonard Hawthorne did something he almost never did. He paid attention to a person he had already dismissed. His gaze followed her every step, not with entitlement now, but with a calculating curiosity. How had a waitress, effortlessly delivered an investment breakdown on par with his top analysts? "Marcus," Leonard murmured to his partner, his voice low and intent. "Find out everything you can about her." Marcus glanced at him, startled but nodded, because in that moment, Leonard Hawthorne wasn't thinking about his dinner, his portfolio, or his prestige. He was thinking about the one thing that always commanded his full focus, a mystery, and Amara Cole had just become the most intriguing mystery he had encountered in years. Full name, background, education, work history. "I want everything," Leonard said quietly, his eyes never leaving Amara as she moved through the dining room. "If she sneezed in 3rd grade, I want the details." "Understood?" Marcus Ellington nodded, though unease flickered across his face. He had worked with Leonard for a decade, long enough to recognize that look, the laser-focused obsession that appeared whenever Leonard sensed something, or someone, that didn't add up. "You think she's a corporate plant?" "Spy," Marcus whispered. Leonard slowly shook his head. His gaze followed Amara as she approached another table, this time a group of Japanese executives. She greeted them in fluent Japanese, took their orders with ease, and bowed slightly before walking away. "Not an accent, not a stutter." "Perfect, no," Leonard murmured. "Not a spy. Something else, and more dangerous." What unsettled Leonard Hawthorne wasn't just her intelligence. It was what her intelligence implied. His $4.2 billion empire had been built on a single belief. He could read people better than anyone alive. He found talent before the world noticed it. He spotted brilliance before it had a name. That was his edge, his pride, his identity. But tonight, in his favorite fortress of luxury, a woman he had dismissed within seconds had dismantled that certainty. When Amara returned to the table to check on their drinks, Leonard was ready, mask rebuilt, arrogance reloaded. "So Amara," he said, dragging his eyes down to her name tag as though discovering her name were an act of condescension. "Harvard? Stanford? Wharton?" His smirk sharpened. "I assume one of those institutions is responsible for your impressive market insight?" Amara smiled, but there was nothing soft in it. The smile carried edges, calm, knowing edges, and for the first time Leonard felt something he rarely encountered in his world, vulnerability. "Actually," Amara said, her voice steady and composed, "I learned a great deal simply by watching men like you make catastrophic decisions, rooted in arrogance instead of data." The sentence landed like a blade. Marcus sputtered into his wine. Leonard felt heat surge up his neck, flooding his face. No one spoke to Leonard Hawthorne like that. Not competitors, not board members, and certainly not a woman pouring water at his table. Leonard leaned forward, eyes narrowed, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I don't know what stunt you're trying to pull, but let me make something clear," he hissed. "I've dominated this city for 15 years. I know every mover and every market voice that matters. If you were relevant, Amara, I would know. Amara studied him for a moment, head slightly tilted as though examining a specimen under glass. That's the problem with power, she answered calmly. You mistake visibility for competence. You assume that if you don't recognize someone, they must be insignificant. The words were delivered without anger, without ego, just truth. And that truth rattled him. Leonard felt a flicker beneath his anger, something he refused to name. It wasn't intimidation, he told himself. It wasn't doubt. But it felt uncomfortably close to both. So what is this? Leonard snapped. Some kind of humility lecture? From a waitress? I'm not lecturing, Amara replied, clearing plates with unhurried precision. I'm observing. It's fascinating to watch how certain personalities unravel the moment their assumptions fail. She walked away again, calm, bothered, untouched by his rage. Leonard grabbed his phone. Jaw clenched. Thompson. It's me, he said as soon as the line clicked. His voice was cold now, calculated. I need a deep background pull on someone, immediately. Because if Amara Cole wasn't who she appeared to be, then he would find out who she really was. I need a full workup on someone, Leonard said into the phone, his voice low and commanding. Her name is Amara Cole. She's at Maison Verdun. I want everything. Education, employment, financial records, legal history. And I want it fast, Leonard ended the call. Believing he was about to expose a fraud, he had no idea he was about to uncover a tragedy. Because what Leonard didn't know, what no one in that restaurant could have guessed was that Amara Cole had once been one of Wall Street's rising stars, a senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs, 5 years in the top tier, architect of proprietary trading algorithms that had generated over $200 million in profit. A woman whispered about in boardrooms, envied in conference halls, courted by hedge funds, until the day her world was destroyed. Her supervisor, a well-connected, white executive with a fragile ego and a reputation, built on her work, had needed a scapegoat when the SEC began probing irregular trades. So he fed her to the wolves. False accusations, fabricated suspicion, career sabotage disguised as internal compliance concerns. There was no conviction. There was no evidence, because she was innocent. But in finance, rumor is a virus that spreads faster than truth. By the time the dust settled, Amara's name was radioactive. No reputable institution would touch her. Her savings vanished, swallowed by legal fees. Friends disappeared. Doors slammed. Her brilliance became irrelevant, replaced by a narrative she could not escape. And so she vanished from the world she once dominated. The uniform, the tray, the polite smile at a luxury restaurant, they were camouflage, a temporary life raft while she rebuilt herself in the shadows. Leonard Hawthorne believed he was hunting a mystery he could control. What he did not yet understand was that the woman he mocked for, Pouring Water, had once managed portfolios larger than his, and she was still sharper than anyone on his payroll. She still tracked global markets at dawn, still ran silent algorithms on her rebuilt hardware, still saw economic movements before they formed headlines. Amara Cole was not a nobody. She was a storm, quiet only because she chose to be. While Leonard schemed, Amara observed. She studied the table with the same analytical precision she once used on market volatility charts. She noted how Leonard's thumb tapped against his glass whenever he was uncertain. She noted how Marcus, ever the obedient lieutenant, nodded at every word Leonard spoke, mirroring his opinions, never daring to introduce one of his own. She noted how both men treated the staff with reflexive, casual disrespect, but what interested her most were the fragments of conversation she had overheard: mergers, confidential valuations, overseas acquisitions. Leonard Hawthorne was sitting on information that could move markets, and he was careless enough to discuss it in public. Amateurs hid their ignorance. Power often hid its arrogance. Mr. Hawthorne, came a nervous voice. The maitre d', Pierre, approached with a stiff bow, anxiety written across his face. I want to sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding with our staff member. Amara is new. She may not yet understand the proper etiquette required when serving guests of your, status. Leonard waved him off with a flick of the wrist. Relax, Pierre. No offense taken. I'm actually finding her educational. Pierre blinked, baffled, but bowed again and quickly retreated. Leonard's attention returned to Amara, who now stood near the bar speaking softly with another waiter. There was something about the way she carried herself. Shoulders back, head high. Gaze steady. That radiated an authority no uniform could conceal. Every attempt Leonard made to belittle her, every subtle humiliation he tried to deliver, only seemed to sharpen her presence rather than diminish it. He didn't realize it, but his arrogance was forging something within her, reinforcing a steel she had already built through loss, betrayal and survival. She would not break, and Leonard Hawthorne, self-appointed king of the financial world, was too blinded by ego to understand one simple truth. Some opponents don't fight with volume, status, or spectacle. Some destroy you quietly. What the billionaire failed to calculate was simple. Arrogance blinds. Every smirk, every patronizing syllable, every flash of contempt was a data point he never audited. He was building his own downfall, and he never saw the ledger bleeding red. 3 days after the meeting at Chateau Laurent, David Richmond sat in his 47th floor office, staring at a report that dismantled his assumptions. Kesha Williams, 28, clean record. Degree in economics from an insignificant community college. No corporate background. No hedge fund internships. No Wall Street footprint. On paper, she was exactly what she appeared to be. A disposable waitress in a city that swallows the unknown without leaving a trace. David read it twice. It still failed to align with reality. No one reaches that level of financial precision by studying at night in a school that can't even produce a mid-tier analyst. Across the desk, Michael Torres kept scanning the pages, pretending to understand the contradictions. He offered shallow theories about lies, forged documents, and hidden identities. David dismissed all of it. Thompson had already verified the birth certificate. Kesha Williams existed, but her past read like a redacted file. 5 years of real history. Before that, nothing but silence. While Richmond obsessed over gaps in her timeline, Kesha was 2 blocks away in a cheap cafe on the Lower East Side, typing fast on an aging laptop, running calculations that would compromise his empire. On the screen, Richmond's empire lay open. Investment trails, corporate diagrams, buried lawsuits, and something more valuable than all of it. Trading anomalies that pointed to systematic insider exploitation. A voice broke the silence behind her. Marcus, she didn't turn. She didn't need to. Marcus Chun sat across from her, sharp-eyed and unblinking. Former Goldman, one of the few who never believed the accusations that destroyed her past life. He slid a brown envelope across the table. Richmond had escalated. He hired Thompson and Associates. Standard procedure for firms that want the truth without leaving fingerprints. Kesha reviewed the contents. Richmond had found nothing. Exactly as engineered. Marcus questioned her strategy. She didn't elaborate. His curiosity was irrelevant. David's humiliation at the restaurant had revealed a weakness she could weaponize. Men like Richmond collapse under their own ego. They cannot compute intelligence from someone they classify as beneath them. While Marcus analyzed risk, Richmond fed his obsession. He returned to Chateau Laurent, demanding her section, provoking her with amateur traps disguised as casual market chatter. His performance reeked of insecurity. One Thursday, he attempted another setup, interrupting her mid-service with a question about Asian currency volatility and its impact on commodities. You said. Kesha answered with intentional hesitation, staging the performance. She mentioned yuan volatility, arbitrage, and rare metals tied to Vietnam. David took the bait. He struck back immediately, announcing that Vietnam's agreements were suspended 2 weeks earlier. He wanted an audience. He wanted dominance. The room reacted on cue, whispers, glances, quiet ridicule. Kesha lowered her eyes and withdrew, playing the role he needed her to be. Michael objected. David dismissed him. He justified the cruelty as hierarchy enforcement. David assumed victory. He failed to register that the mistake was planted. Kesha was mapping his behavioral patterns, not debating economics. His appetite for humiliation confirmed his predictability. Each public attack supplied her with psychological leverage and social context. His repeated visits granted proximity. Phone fragments, gesture analysis, schedule hints, travel references, and business slips from calls he assumed were private. He had conditioned himself to overlook staff. That blindness was now part of her strategy, you said. David exposed operational vulnerabilities through routine behavior. He left his phone face up, discussed confidential strategy in public, and treated staff as non-observing fixtures. That negligence gave Kesha access to fragments of a planned hostile takeover involving a medical technology firm. The information aligned with irregular trading activity she had already mapped. She monitored price movement and reconstructed a pattern indicating repeated insider exploitation over a 2-year window. Marcus cautioned her about evidentiary standards. She ignored doubt and focused on outcome. Richmond's arrogance was supplying leverage and timeline markers. His fixation on humiliating her gave her continued proximity, while his investigative efforts remained misdirected and shallow. He believed he was unveiling her. In reality, she was building a structured dossier capable of exonerating herself and collapsing an internal corruption network tied to Richmond investments. The humiliation phase ended. The execution phase began. 3 weeks after the encounter at Chateau Laurent, Richmond gathered investors to finalize the hostile takeover of Biotech Solutions. He projected confidence and presented inflated forecasts to secure foreign capital. His plan depended on secrecy and speed. The boardroom door opened mid-presentation. Expectation of a routine interruption collapsed when Kesha entered, dressed in a tailored executive suit. Her presence disrupted the psychological hierarchy of the room instantly. She introduced herself without hesitation and announced that the investors were missing material information. Richmond reacted with anger and demanded security, but his voice carried strain. She ignored him and set a briefcase on the conference table, signaling that she had come to deliver facts, not requests. Kesha stated her purpose: to correct the false narrative David built. Michael attempted to alert security, but she proceeded without acknowledging him. She revealed her former identity: Kesha Davidson, senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs, expert in emerging markets and fraud detection. She produced records of her work, profits generated, and the circumstances of the false accusation that removed her from Wall Street. She clarified that the identity David investigated was a shell she constructed after the scandal. David attempted to discredit her, but she countered by presenting a compiled dossier of Richmond's insider trading activity. She announced to the investors that Richmond Investments had executed illegal trades over a 2-year period, supported by 15 separate evidentiary events. David tried to dismiss her as unstable, but she explained that she obtained the information by listening to his unguarded business conversations for weeks. Kesha explained how David's carelessness exposed him: the unlocked phone, the face-up placement during confidential calls, and the assumption that service staff were non-observing background noise. She opened her laptop and played the recorded call from the 15th, capturing David instructing his accountant to conceal the origin of insider information tied to the Meridian merger. His voice was unmistakable. Investors reacted immediately, shifting uneasily. Several closing their binders, she continued, presenting emails between Richmond Investments and Biotech Solutions from 6 months prior, proving coordination long before any legitimate valuation justified a takeover. She stacked evidence without pause: internal emails, call logs, transaction histories, and trade timelines establishing a consistent pattern of market manipulation. David attempted to question her methods, then stopped, aware that the question itself confirmed his exposure. Kesha stated that his arrogance provided the access. Every insult, every public attempt to diminish her, created opportunities to gather proof. The lead investor, Yamamoto, rose from his chair, signaling the collapse of David's credibility and the shift in control. Yamamoto demanded confirmation. David attempted to reframe the situation as an engineered hoax, accusing Kesha of blackmail. She shut down the claim immediately, stating that full evidence packets had already been submitted to the SEC, the FBI, and multiple journalists. She added that the Wall Street Journal would publish the story the next morning, removing any possibility of containment or negotiation. Panic spread through the room. Investors conferred in hushed tones, calculating exits and legal exposure. She then confirmed that the Biotech Solutions Board had been notified of Richmond's unauthorized communications, ensuring the takeover was dead and the conspiracy traceable. David collapsed against the table, confronted by the irreversible consequences. He accused her of destroying his empire. She corrected him, stating that she only exposed verifiable facts, and that the collapse was the direct result of his decisions, not her intervention. Kesha stated that every manipulation, every illegal trade, and every abuse of power was fully documented. David's phone rang repeatedly, media, regulators, and investors all converging at once. His structure of influence collapsed in real time. He asked why she had done it. She answered without emotion. He operated under the belief that wealth granted the right to degrade others, and that a black waitress could be dismissed as insignificant. She said the exposure was necessary to establish consequences and to demonstrate the cost of underestimating the wrong opponent. Investors abandoned the room, terminating agreements and distancing themselves from the fallout. David remained seated, forced to watch 15 years of self-mythology dissolve in minutes. The target he tried to degrade became the architect of his collapse, weaponizing each display of contempt with calculated precision. Outside Richmond Tower, Kesha called Marcus and stated the operation was complete. The evidence had reached regulators and the press, and Richmond had lost the role of hunter. The remaining question was not whether he would survive the scandal, but whether he would comprehend that the strategist behind his destruction was the very person he dismissed as insignificant. 6 months later, Kesha worked from her own office on the 35th floor of a midtown tower. With Manhattan visible across the skyline, the plaque on the door identified her as CEO and founder of a financial consulting firm, already representing several major investment funds. A Wall Street Journal cover had labeled her the analyst who toppled an empire. High-profile firms attempted to recruit her, but she no longer required their validation. Marcus entered with a glass of champagne and delivered the final update. Richmond had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay billions in fines and restitution. Kesha looked out over the city. Somewhere across the river, David Richmond sat in a cell, forced to accept that the waitress he underestimated had executed the strategy that erased his empire. Richmond Investments was finished. Investors had fled, the company was insolvent, and his assets were being liquidated to cover legal fallout. The Hamptons estate was scheduled for auction. Kesha told Marcus the central irony with clinical clarity. Richmond believed humiliation proved superiority, never realizing that every attempt to demean her supplied the fuel required for his own destruction. He lost because his ego made him blind. His arrogance was not only immoral, it was tactically fatal. Her phone rang. A Forbes reporter requested an exclusive feature on her fraud detection methodology. Universities were offering professorships. Publishers competed to secure rights to her memoir. The 3-week cover job at Chateau Laurent had become the catalyst for the largest financial exposure of the decade. One journalist described her approach as the definitive case study in weaponizing adversity into strategic dominance. Pierre from the restaurant had called earlier, joking about adding a menu item in her honor. Even Chateau Laurent was now exploiting the notoriety, attracting customers eager to visit the place where a so-called waitress dismantled a billionaire and exposed a criminal empire. David Richmond had become a social and professional outcast. Former allies avoided eye contact in public. His social media presence collapsed after a string of defensive outbursts that only reinforced the public perception of guilt. His ex-wife filed for divorce, extracting what remained of his liquid assets through the courts. Marcus observed the central paradox with clinical detachment. Richmond had engineered his own destroyer. Every attempt to demean Kesha intensified the precision of her retaliation. She recalled the moment he mocked her by asking for investment advice. He assumed he was ridiculing a powerless subordinate. In truth, he was supplying motivation to someone more intelligent, more disciplined, and more strategic than he would ever be. The aftermath became institutionalized in business academia. Professors coined the term Richmond syndrome to describe executives whose arrogance and prejudice blind them to actual risk. The case became mandatory study material in corporate ethics and leadership courses. Kesha opened a drawer and examined a framed photo of herself at Chateau Laurent, serving the man who would later beg the world to believe he was the victim. The image functioned as a tactical reminder. Real power requires no performance. It watches, collects, and executes at the precise moment when the opponent is fully exposed. Richmond had not lost to luck. He lost to his own assumptions.